Hi, I'm Bernardine Evaristo, and this is Vogue Visionaries. I won the Booker Prize in 2019 with my novel Go Woman Other. It was my 8th book. I have been in the arts and writing for 40 years. I'm very happy to be here talking about my career to those writers who are coming through at the moment. This class is in 5 chapters, and you can use the time bar below to skip ahead to any chapter that you like. In this class, we're going to cover how to get started as a writer, how to develop your writing style, how to get published, how to use your voice for good, plus some tips for success. I spent my whole childhood reading, and it's very hard to think about my first memory of reading, except that I spent every Saturday going to the library and taking out 2 or 3 books and returning them the following Saturday. I certainly remember a book called Ballet Shoes by somebody called Noel Streatfeild, and I just remember being engrossed in the storytelling. So I went to a girls' grammar school, and we were expected to do O-levels and A-levels, which I did. But I got into drama when I was 14 and I realised I wanted to be an actor, and that was my focus. I started to write when I was at drama school, actually, and we were encouraged to create our own theatre. My theatre plays were always dramatic poems. So writing for me came about because I wanted to write from a Black British woman's perspective, because at the time when I was at drama school, there were no plays by or about us. Well, for a start, aspiring writers need to read. So I teach creative writing at Brunel University London, and sometimes we get students coming to do a degree in creative writing and they're not interested in reading the set books. And of course, as a writer, you have to read. You have to read as much as you write, because that is where you're going to get your inspiration from. I think there are some really absolutely wonderful writers out there at the moment who are doing great things, especially women of colour. So I think in order to be inspired, I would recommend somebody like Diana Evans. Like me, she's mixed race, English, Nigerian, and she writes from that perspective. And Ordinary People is very much a contemporary book about how we live today, and I think it's a really important book, and I think people will find that in particular inspiring. There's another novel that has been doing very well recently called The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. It's about 2 sisters who are light-skinned Black women, and one of them chooses to pass for white and the other one doesn't. And it's about the consequences of the decisions that they make. Candice Carty-Williams' Queenie is a terrific book. It's her debut novel. It was published 2 years ago. I think especially young writers will be inspired by that. I think it's really important that you read writers such as Emma Dabiri, whose novel is Don't Touch My Hair, and it's about Black women and hair, but it's about so much more than that. It's about philosophy and history and society, and it's also about her personal narrative. I also recommend Afua Hirsch's debut book, Brit-ish. So you see where I'm going with these books. So I'm very much part of the sisterhood, and I want to support the writers who are covering some of the areas that I'm interested in myself. Those are just some of the books that I would like to recommend to you. Every writer I read inspires my writing in some way or another, because I like to see how writers tell their stories, and I like to see the quality of their prose, but also the quality of their psychological insight into their characters. That is so important. That's what I'm interested in as a writer. Obviously, I'm interested in telling the stories that haven't been told, because that's what I've been doing all my life. But when I look at other writers, I want to be inspired by the quality of their writing. Toni Morrison is my she's my heroine. I've read all her books. I love her work. Obviously, she's not with us anymore, but she is such an incredible craftswoman and such a huge inspiration to me for some 40 years. When I began writing fiction, I didn't understand narrative structure. Didn't really understand, I'd say, characterization. I certainly couldn't write dialogue. But I didn't realize that you can't just write fiction and not have any sense of direction with it, that you have to understand that there is a structure that needs to be sewn into your writing to give it the necessary suspense and tension. And so I had somebody in my life who was a writer who'd written a couple of novels, and he told me that I needed to think about story structure. He told me that I needed to think about my character, what they wanted. So my main character, my protagonist, what do they want in this world that I've created for them? What is the thing that's going to drive them through this world? And what are the obstacles that I'm going to put in the way of them achieving whatever it is that they want? And that will give the fiction the beginning, at least, of what we call narrative drive, rather than just writing and letting it go all over the place, which is what I had been doing. For young people today, I think you have to make decisions. You know, if your burning ambition is to write, then you need to find a way to sustain yourself financially. So I think you need to get a job, but you need to get a job that is not going to take you away from your writing too much. So a job where, when the day ends, you leave the work and you go home and do your writing, and then you write in the evenings and you write at the weekend. Or you could marry a rich person. People do. Some people do find that they can be supported by other people, but most people don't have that as an option. I would say that my writing didn't work financially until I won the Booker Prize 2 years ago. And I wrote because I loved it, I was passionate about it, and it was the only thing I really wanted to do. So what I did was I had what you now call rather glamorously a portfolio career, in that I juggled lots of other things. And I took on jobs as an arts administrator to give me a sort of basic income. But those jobs were part-time jobs because I wanted to write the rest of the time. So I would work, say, 2 days a week, have very little money, and then write the rest of the time. And then over the years, I developed, other income streams. And they would be, for example, writing book reviews, judging prizes, touring internationally and also around the UK, and that can be very well paid, and doing various other things to support my writing. But in terms of actually earning a living from my writing, that has only happened in the last year. And I'm 61. You know, ideas can come at any moment, but I can also train my mind to have ideas. And I try to train my mind to have ideas when I can sit down and write them, not when I'm on my bicycle, because I can't write them down. If I don't write them down, it's very likely that I'm going to forget them. Each novel comes into creation in a different way. So there isn't a sort of set formula that I have for writing a novel. All of my writing in some way explores the African diaspora. Past, present, real, imagined, as I put it. When I wrote Girl, Woman, Other, I wanted to write a novel about Black British women, putting as many of them into a single novel as possible. With this book, in fact, Blonde Roots, I wanted to write about the transatlantic slave trade, but I wanted to do something different with it. That's the book. It's about a white woman who is enslaved by Africans. So I turned the whole transatlantic slave trade history on its head and just subvert everything and anything you can imagine around that particular aspect of history. It's really interesting, isn't it? The ideas that take hold. I have no problem coming up with ideas because I think the imagination is something that the more you exercise it, the more access you have to it. So I have lots and lots of ideas, but then which idea is it that I'm going to use to write a novel? It's the one that it feels to me that I'm doing the most important thing with the book. I think that is it for me. So transatlantic slave trade, such an important part of world history. So I want to tackle really important issues, even though I use a lot of humor in my work and so on. I love creating characters. My books are as much character driven, as we say, as anything else. I create my characters from everybody I've ever known, and also my observations, understanding human behavior. I'm a very curious person. I think it's really good to be a curious person if you want to write fiction, because I like to know what's going on in people's lives. I'm incredibly nosy, and I also like to know what's really going on in their lives. I want to go behind what we see and try and understand human psychology. I have known in my life people who talk about themselves all the time. I'm somebody who likes to listen anyway, so I don't always object to that. But I do know people who can really talk for England. They can talk for like 3 hours. And they will never ask you about yourself. And if you try and talk about yourself, they will then lead the conversation back to themselves. And there is a character in one of my books very much based on that kind of trait. So I guess that's one way in which I've sort of transferred an observation I have on human behavior into my characters. I Can't write shorthand. I can barely write with my hand these days because I don't do enough of it. I find my ideas and my stories start to emerge through the act of writing, which is on my computer. However, that said, I think looking at creative work on a computer, like, you know, a novel, a short story, whatever, can be very misleading if I don't print it up. When it's a Word document, it just looks too good. I can't see the flaws in it. I print it up and I can see the flaws, and then I mark it up on the page, and then I put it back into the computer. The other thing I do is move away from my desk, which is problematic when we're in lockdown, and go and sit in a cafe and write. Because when I'm sitting in a cafe and writing, I can see my work even more clearly. I can see what I need to do with it. Or if I'm on a train, Tube has been brilliant for revising my work. As soon as I sit on a tube, I can see what needs to happen to the text. So that's my process. How do you know when a work is finished? That's a really big question. I have learnt to know when a work is finished, but it took me many years, and I needed other people to help me understand when a work was finished. Now I kind of know. And when I'm reaching the end of a book, for example, it feels like it's coming to a natural end. And also that there is nothing more to be said through this book that I'm writing. It's like the story's been told. And, you know, if you understand story structure and you understand that there has to be a denouement at the end, you know, there has to be some kind of ending to the adventure that you've taken the reader on. I think if people are struggling to know A, how to begin, or B, how to finish a piece, I think sometimes you just need to rely on people around you to help you. Writer's block is a figment of your imagination, okay? And I think that's a really useful way to approach it. I do not suffer from writer's block. There may be times when I am less productive than other times, right? But because I've developed this career over a period of time, I know that I will get back into the work. But I think when we talk about writer's block, we need to really look at what we're really talking about. And that might be that you're lacking in confidence. If you're lacking in confidence and you want to be a writer, you need to go and get help to build your confidence, for you to believe in yourself as somebody who can write. You might say to yourself, I'm going to dig deeper and see what's going on with me and my craft, my writing, my life, my emotional life, so that I can produce the work that I need to be producing. If writing isn't your full-time job, and it is really for very few writers, then you need to find a job that's going to allow you to write. A job in a publishing house, for example, in publicity and marketing, might be an option for you. If you're going to be a writer, it's very useful to understand how publishing works. Now, if you want to become an editor in publishing, that can be a very demanding job and you have to take it home with you. But if you work in publicity and marketing, you really do understand the machinery of publishing. And this will put you at an advantage when you want to get published yourself. I know people who have worked in publicity and marketing and publishing, and they've done really well with their books because they understand the system. And when they've gone out there into the world with their books, they know how to promote their books. And that is so important for us writers. Some people have an ear for dialogue, right? That's it. It's called an ear for dialogue. They just are able to capture people's speech. I had to work hard at it until I kind of had a breakthrough moment. But it's about listening to how people speak and just absorbing that. And so if you're somebody who observes people and listens to what they say, I suggest it might be easier for you to replicate that on the page. But when you are writing dialogue, we are rarely writing dialogue as it is spoken. We are capturing the essence of what people say. That's what we do. Because if we were to write dialogue as it's spoken, it would be too much. It would be too unwieldy. I tend to say and you know a lot, and you can't put that in dialogue because nobody's going to be interested in it. What you do is you capture the essence of it, and it's a skill that you can develop. You can't just write and expect to produce something that is going to be structured in such a way that it's going to work as fiction. You need to put that structure in. You need to think, particularly with a novel, about narrative arc. How are you going to shape this work that you've produced? Who are the characters? Where are you going to set it? What is the journey you're going to take them on? What are the obstacles and challenges? The idea is that the characters are going to be transformed by the end of the novel, that they're not the same at the beginning of it as they were at the end of it. Short fiction kind of lends itself a lot more to all kinds of experimentation. Although I am an experimental novelist, but within my experimentation, I'm always applying the tools of story structure. You know, if you just put into the internet story structure and you'll get some more advice on how to structure your work. And see you at chapter 3. I think confidence is something that develops over time and over the years. So now I can say that I'm almost invincible in terms of my confidence as a writer. But that is because I have been writing for 40 years. When I began writing, I was really writing for myself. I was writing for performance, yes, but it was because it was something that I really, really enjoyed. But then, you know, you get feedback on your work and that helps to build your confidence. But to be honest, it is something that I think just takes a very long time to build. And I used to do personal development classes in order to develop my confidence. Because the thing about self-belief is that some people think you either have it or you don't. Well, that's not the reality. The reality is that you can develop your self-belief and develop your confidence in whatever you want to do. And that's what I did in terms of my writing and my writing career. Okay, so I am atypical. My first book was published in 1994 and it was a poetry collection. And the poems had been written over the preceding 10 years or so. So the book was a really long time in coming to fruition. I just sent it out to 10 publishers and 10 publishers rejected it. And then I sent it out again to 10 more publishers and 1 publisher accepted it. That's how I got into publishing. My first 2 publishers were tiny. And then by the time I got to my 3rd book, I was published by Penguin. And that changed the direction of my career, I would say. For people who want to get into publishing today, I think it's a very different culture. It's really important that at the point at which you approach publishers, you have your body of work ready. I mean, as in you have your manuscript ready, rather than you have an idea and you approach a publisher. That sometimes works with non-fiction, but generally speaking, especially if you're a debut author, they want to see that you can produce the goods, and then you will get editorial feedback and you'll get help in developing your piece. So a lot of people don't have any connections into the publishing industry, and my answer to that is that you have to find those connections. We're all part of this interconnected community, and it's very hard to be outside of that and to break through. And so you need to get to know the people you need to know. And that means becoming active on the literary scene, even if you're only active as an audience member at poetry events or at book readings and so on. If you want to be an aspiring writer in today's culture, one of the avenues open to you really is to go and study creative writing in a formal setting, to do a BA or a master's in creative writing, because that will help you find your way into the publishing world. You may even get internships in publishing houses or agencies in order to find your way in. But if you're completely outside of it and you remain completely outside of it, it's so hard to break through, but not impossible. So there is this saying, you know, it's about who you know. And I hate to say it, that is true to a certain extent, but you get to know the people who you need to know, and then you break through. And even if it's only at the level of forming a writing workshop with a group of people, and it might even be online, and you get together and you share your work, and you then pass on information about how to get into publishing or how to get a short story published in a magazine. So the information that you need is really there. You just need to start looking for it. And I would say that YouTube is a really good place to start. You may not be happy with your publishing deal. Okay, so the first thing is you need to take the advice of your agent who knows the industry inside out and will be able to negotiate on your behalf. And sometimes it's better to go with a publisher and an editor who is really keen on your work and really passionate and gets your work and wants to build a long relationship with you, but can't offer you as much money. as another publisher who might be able to dangle a lot of money in front of you. The other thing to think about is that the publisher, if they want to invest in you, will often offer you a 2-book deal. Now, a 2-book deal means that you get more money, but you do have to produce a second book, and that second book often has to be produced at speed. So you might have written a book that took you 3 or 4 years, and the publisher might require a second book in a year or 18 months, and a lot of writers come unstuck because it can be really challenging writing your second book, whether your first one was successful or not. So be very, very careful about that. So one of the things that a lot of writers want to find is their own voice. They want to be unique. For most people, that will not come at the very beginning. At the very beginning of your writing career, before you've even published anything, you will probably find that you're struggling to find your own voice or voices, and that you are, imitating the writers you admire, or feeling that you should write like the writers that you most admire. And that's a process that you go through. And just go through that, because we all go through that. But know that you're striving to create your own voice. But that voice, your unique way of expressing yourself, will emerge, for most people, it will emerge slowly. And I would say that I had been writing probably about 14 years before I found a way of writing that I felt was unique to me, and it just evolved very slowly. And don't forget that what you read is also going to influence what you write. So if you do want to be the kind of writer who is writing really original works, then read those writers who are doing things very differently. Read a writer like Ali Smith, for example, who is such an original writer, or a poet such as Inua Ellams, who has found his own voice without a doubt. And eventually, you will absorb their genius eventually through osmosis. And at some stage, you will have developed a voice that is unique to you. It's really important to get feedback on your writing. I have written 8 books now, and with each book I will get feedback on it from a number of people, and those people change according to the books that I'm writing. I do not give my book or my books in progress to people who are going to say it's wonderful. That is not the point of it. The point is that they can tell you how it needs to be improved before you actually send it to your agent or to your publisher. So it's so important to get an outsider's point of view on your writing, because when you're writing, you are so enmeshed in what you're doing, you're so close to it, you are so intimate with the work itself. It's like you're in this really deep relationship and you cannot step outside of it and see what it is for what it is, right? When you've been in a relationship and it's been, it might have been very toxic, for example, but it's only when you step outside of it that you realize that that's what was going on. And it's the same with your writing. You are way too close to it to rely just on your own judgment. And also, you're not just writing for yourself, you're writing for a readership. And so you need somebody to be the person who is in the shoes of the reader, who can see what you've done and can help you make it better. Now, you have to find the right people to do that. So if you're writing poetry, you need poets to help you. Fiction, you need novelists or non-fiction. If you can't find professional writers, find professional readers. And by that, I mean people who are serious readers and who will be able to point out strengths, obviously, of your writing, but also be able to tell you in what way it needs to be developed. It's so important. I think criticism has to be constructive. If it's not constructive, it can be incredibly damaging. So when I was writing Girl, Woman, Other, I had various readers, very, very carefully chosen readers. And one of them came back to me after they'd read the book and said, I think, because I have 12 characters in Girl, Woman, Other, 12 equal protagonists. And they came back and said to me, I think you should get rid of all the characters apart from 3 of them and rewrite the book, right? So the whole point of the book is that there are these 12 co-protagonists, and it's about the multiplicity of Black British women's lives. And when this person said this, I just laughed because I thought, this is ridiculous. This is really unhelpful feedback, because I had at that point been working on the novel for 4 years. And for somebody then to tell me to get rid of most of it was the most unhelpful thing that they could say. And also, they were just wrong, because the reception to the book has been about the fact that there are so many of these characters. So the way I dealt with it was to laugh it off. But if it was 20 years ago, 25 years ago, even 30 years ago, I think I would have been distraught. And I think I would have felt really sort of unconfident, really, about what I'd done. And I would have questioned what I'd done. And I would have perhaps changed what I'd done. But at this stage in my career, having, written all the books that I have and so on, I just realized it was a silly thing for this person to say, and I just ignored it. Rejection is really good for you, okay? Rejection, you need rejection in your life. If you don't have rejection in your life, then you are not going to build the skills that you need to sustain a lifelong career, to be honest, doing anything, but certainly as a writer. So we think about rejection as something negative and an obstacle that you have to surmount, and some people are defeated by rejection. I have known people who've sent out their manuscripts to a number of agents or publishers, and they've received rejections and they've given up. Well, if you're going to give up, that's the kind of person you are. But other people have actually been fortified by their rejection, and it has actually consolidated their sense of direction, their commitment to their work, and their belief in their work, and their belief that they are one day going to break through. And for me, after 40 years, to win the Booker Prize, I wouldn't have won it if I'd have been crushed by rejection, because my history, in a sense, has been littered with rejection or so-called failure. So it's really important to embrace rejection, but to use it to empower you to go ahead with achieving your ambition and your dreams. So this is my second book, Lara, and it took me 5 years to write. The first 3 years I wrote it as a regular prose novel, and it didn't work, so I literally threw it in the bin. And then I spent 2 years reworking it as a novel in verse. And I wanted to get it published. But at the point at which I completed this book, I didn't really understand the publishing industry. I didn't have a sense of who the big publishers were, or who the publishers were who were most likely to take my work. And to be honest, they weren't really taking Black British writing much then anyway. It was a very different culture that we were in. So I started to do readings from some of the poems in the book. And somebody heard it at an event that I did, a publisher called Angela Roll Publishing, and they approached me and asked me if they could publish it. And I said yes. What I didn't realize was that because they were such a small and new publisher, that the industry wasn't going to take a lot of notice of this book. Because who publishes you makes a difference in terms of the kind of publicity you might get around a book, the kind of media attention you might get around a book. And this publisher was tiny, so nobody had really heard of them. So what I then did was I did what I did for a very long time, which was to hustle the book. So I would take it to events, I would have spare copies, I would give the book to critics and ask them if they would review the book. I produced leaflets so that people, I could give the leaflets to people. I did massive mail outs through the organization I was then working with, and advertising the book. And I just put the book out there as much as I could. This is before the internet. We're talking about 1996, 1997, before we were all on social media and the rest of it. And eventually the book started to sort of gain some traction, and it started to get some reviews, and very favourable reviews. And then I was asked to do lots of events, and I started touring for the British Council, which I did for many years all over the world. And all of it was really based on this book and the fact that I'd gone with such a tiny publisher, but that I realised that I had to do the work to get the book out there myself, because they weren't able to do that. Then the publisher disappeared after a few years. So then the book was out of print, which of course is a total nightmare for writers. When you publish a book, you think, oh, this is it. It's going to be out there forever. It's going to be in the bookshops. Well, actually, no. A lot of books don't stay in the bookshops very long if they don't sell, for a start. and the publisher disappeared. They folded. They weren't making enough money. So then I approached another publisher, a very, very big poetry publisher called Blood Axe Books. And what I said to them was, this was published earlier, but I want to add new material to it. And what I didn't say is about my family history. So it's about my family history. It goes from Brazil, Nigeria, Germany, England, Ireland. And I said, I'm going to add about a third new material to this book. Will you publish it? So that it's kind of like being republished, if you like, with new material. And they said yes. And it's still with them, and they're one of the most established poetry publishers in the country. So it had a very unusual publishing history. This is what it takes. It takes a level of determination and tenacity in order to make sure that your work gets out there and that your work stays there. And that's what I had to do in order to give this book a second life, Lara. And it was published with new material in 2009. I met my publisher at Penguin. I've been with them 20 years now at someone else's book launch. But he is an extraordinary publisher. He also publishes A.D. Smith, for example, and Ali Smith, and a whole Arundhati Roy. He has always been somebody who has been inclusive in terms of the kinds of writers that he publishes. But a lot of the publishers around have not. And they haven't even noticed that there have been these huge gaps in terms of the kinds of books that have been available out there, but it's no longer the case. Well, there are all kinds of campaigns out there trying to diversify the curriculum, which is very problematic, trying to open the minds of the people who are in control of the curriculum to make sure that children in their education system study a wide range of books and literature that reflect the society we live in. And there is such a problem with that, because a recent report said that it's very feasible for a child to go through the whole of the education system in Britain and not read a book by a person of colour. So we have a problem there, and especially in terms of, say, Black and Asian history, which isn't taught in schools, and that is shameful because it's such an important part of this country's history through slavery and colonialism, and also just the changing demographic of Britain from the middle of the 20th century onwards. So we're now in this time where, because of social media, it's very easy to be part of a community. And I am very much part of a community, a very broad community of writers who I try to take with me, especially at the moment. I have a much bigger platform since I won the Booker Prize. Things that I say in social media now make a difference in a way that nobody was paying much attention to me before. What does it take to retweet that writer's work? It takes about a second, probably. So I think it's really important that people do continue to share their platforms and to use the social media that's around to be fully participating in the communities to which they belong. There are so many young writers out there who are publishing books that are important books, and they are often their debut books, and some of them are reaching very large audiences. There's a writer called Candice Brathwaite who has published a book called I Am Not Your Baby Mother, and it's a kind of memoir, really, about her experience of being a Black mother, and I think it's a really lovely book and a really important book, and I think people should go out there and buy it. Caleb Femi is a poet. He's from South London. He's just published his first poetry collection, and it's called Poor, and it is an absolutely fantastic book. Jay Bernard is also a poet. Jay is non-binary, and they have published their first book called Surge, which has done incredibly well. So these are just some of the writers who I think are out there and doing great things. I would like to tell my younger self that everything I went through, good, bad, whatever, all my experiences have led me to the place I am at today, and that I would not change a thing. I would not change a thing, even that really bad relationship that lasted 5 years when I should have left after 5 days. because it's what's made me who I am today. And also as a writer, it's really good to have lots of life experiences to give you insight into human psychology, not least your own, but also other people's. Very good material for some of my characters. So I'm proud of my books, 8 books, and all my other writings. Every time I publish a book, it's always, it's so exciting when that book actually, the hard or softback book, turns up. I'm very proud of my activism. I've set up arts inclusion projects, actually going back to Theatre of Black Women in the 1980s. It was Britain's first Black women's theatre company, and it lasted through the 80s. And I'm proud of my awards. I'm proud of the Booker Prize. It really did transform my career beyond my wildest imaginings. And I have long been very ambitious, because I have been, writing a long time. And, most writers, we want our work to get out there to as wide a readership as possible. And it was so gratifying to know that I had reached a point in my career where I had the kind of exposure I had actually wanted for about 25 years. So, yep, Booker was a wonderful thing for me, and I was the first Black woman to win it. And seriously, it really needs to go to another Black woman as soon as possible. And there are always writers who are brilliant writers who are eligible to win that prize. It's up to the judges, and the composition of the judges makes a difference. My single most important piece of advice for aspiring writers is to do the work, do the writing, and also do the reading. I'm Bernardine Evaristo. Thank you so much for watching my Vogue Visionaries. And now I'm going to sashay away.